The markets are closed, but the business stories are just heating up. Hello, I'm Raine Musñgi. Catch up with us on Business Brief. Asian shares plummeted on Friday as concerns about the upcoming reciprocal tariffs and a widening trade war weighed on investors' appetite for risk. Gold hit a new record on demand for safe havens. A regional gauge of equities fell 0.8%, led by Japan and South Korea, after both the S&P 500 and Nasdaq 100 slipped Thursday. Indexes in Hong Kong rose while China fluctuated. China's foreign ministry said on Thursday the planned U.S. tariffs on imported vehicles violate WTO rules and won't help Washington solve its own problems.
China has noticed that major trading partners of the United States have responded. There are no winners in trade wars and tariff wars, and no country's development and prosperity are achieved by imposing tariffs. The U.S.'s actions violate WTO rules, undermine the rules-based multilateral trading system and the common interests of people of all countries, and are not conducive to solving its own problems.
South Korea's auto sector is expected to face considerable difficulties when U.S. import tariffs on cars announced by Trump take effect and the government plans an emergency response by April.
About 50% of our automobile exports go to the United States, so there are concerns about significant damage to the auto industry. The difficulties will be especially severe for not only the finished car manufacturers, but also the parts suppliers.
Japanese shares dropped also because Friday is the ex-dividend date for most companies in the fiscal year end. Hundreds of new cars were seen at the Spanish port of Santander on Thursday after the U.S. unveiled a 25% tariff on imported vehicles, expanding a global trade war, hammering stocks, and testing already strained ties with allies. The European Commission said the European Union is preparing its response to the new tariffs on imported vehicles announced by U.S. President Donald Trump. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen described the move as bad for businesses, worse for consumers. Spanish Economy Minister Carlos Cuerpo said tariffs on cars will cause most harm to the U.S., and even though the impact on Spain will be minimal, there will be a knock-on effect on Spanish-made components supplied to other manufacturers. The U.S. imported $474 billion worth of automotive products in 2024, including passenger cars worth $220 billion. Mexico, Japan, South Korea, Canada, and Germany, all close U.S. allies, were the biggest suppliers. One auto expert says tariffs will hit all automakers and consumers will pay for them.
It's going to affect every automaker different. Of course, no automaker wants to incur an extra cost for bringing their cars into the U.S. The goal is to get many of those manufacturers to build their cars in the U.S. And the truth is, many of them do. And Mercedes-Benz, same thing. The problem is with these types of answers is it still varies model by model and brand by brand. Just because Mercedes-Benz builds cars in the U.S. does not mean they build all their cars in the U.S. They build some of them. Well, most manufacturers, if hit with a 25% tariff, would likely have to pass some of that cost on to consumers. There's no way that most automakers can absorb all that themselves. They're going to have to pass some of it along to customers. But what we don't know is how much, when, and what percentage.
Meanwhile, a coalition of European leaders ruled out the possibility of easing sanctions on Russia, one of the President Vladimir Putin's demands to agree to a partial ceasefire with Ukraine. Bloomberg reports the European Union has made it clear that it's too soon to discuss easing sanctions, which would require the unanimous approval of its 27 member states. Europe's determination to maintain sanctions on Russia risks becoming a major point of tension with the U.S. as President Trump pushes for a quick end to the conflict in Ukraine.
We have more support for Ukraine to make sure Ukraine is in the strongest possible position, both now and in further negotiations. Second, complete clarity that now is not the time for lifting of sanctions. Quite the contrary, what we discussed is how we can increase sanctions to support the US initiative to bring Russia to the table through further pressure from this group of countries.
No lifting of any kind of sanctions until Russia will stop this war. And I think more pressure on it, more packages of sanctions. This is important. The second point, as you said, Kira, that new packages to strengthen Ukraine, and we heard of some of leaders' new packages. We are very thankful to all the leaders.
We have seen how the negotiations have gone so far and that Russia has always added something afterwards. This shows very clearly that Russia is currently not interested in real peace. That makes it all the more important that we insist on a ceasefire, that it is possible and that it is linked to the immediate cessation of attacks on infrastructure, for example, and that more opportunities for a good future for Ukraine can arise from it, especially for a fair and reasonable peace.
We have to hope for the best but prepare for the worst. And so my wish is for the Americans to be engaged by our side, and my wish is for the Americans to provide support or even active participation in all of this, because it is good for their European allies, it is good for NATO, it is good for all of us. But we have to prepare for a situation in which they will not be with us. We have to prepare for both cases.
Bloomberg reports the U.S. is pushing to control all major future infrastructure and mineral investments in Ukraine, potentially gaining a veto over any role for Kyiv's other allies and undermining its bid for European Union membership. It would represent an unprecedented expansion of U.S. economic influence in Europe's largest country by area, just at the time when it's attempting to align with the EU. In a move that could rattle global trade, the United States suspends its contribution to the World Trade Organization, signaling a deeper shift away from international economic cooperation under President Donald Trump. 3 trade sources confirmed the funding pause as the Trump administration pushes to cut government spending and reinforce its America First trade agenda. Washington has repeatedly criticized the WTO, accusing its appellate body of overreaching in trade disputes. The U.S. funding freeze threatens to weaken the WTO's ability to mediate global trade issues, adding uncertainty for export-driven economies like the Philippines, and raising risks for businesses that depend on a stable, rule-based trade system. The U.S. economy faces increasing threats from trade policy turmoil and worsening fiscal conditions, with 60% of chief financial officers anticipating a recession in the U.S. by late 2025. A CNBC survey shows trade disruptions have emerged as businesses' primary concern, cited by 30% of CFOs as their top external risk, surpassing inflation and weak consumer demand. Many are describing current policies as chaotic and disruptive to long-term planning. The economic warnings have intensified, with Moody's reaffirming its negative outlook on U.S. creditworthiness on Tuesday, citing ballooning budget deficits and unsustainable debt levels that threaten long-term stability. The credit agency noted this downward trajectory has accelerated since its November 2023 decision to downgrade the U.S. credit outlook to negative, a move that maintained the AAA rating but signaled growing risks. On the lighter side now, an original model of E.T., the extraterrestrial, is the showstopper at Sotheby's. There Are Such Things 20th Century Horror, Science Fiction, and Fantasy on-Screen auction. The model of the gentle alien from Steven Spielberg's 1982 hit is estimated to reach nearly $1 million. The model was designed and built by special effects artist Carlo Rambaldi, the visionary monster maker behind E.T., Dune, Alien, King Kong, and other films. It's one of only 3 E.T.s used during the making of the 1982 classic. Standing at just over 3 feet tall, the model starred in the film's iconic closet scene, in which E.T. disguises himself among stuffed animals.
Rambaldi was brought in to recreate this character and make it lovable, make it someone that you could feel empathy for. And in working on the eyes, he wanted to come up with a design that could be universally captivating to people. And so he was really struggling with, how am I going to do this? How am I going to do this? And one day he looked at his daughter's cat, which had these beautiful eyes, beautiful big blue eyes, and he realized, oh my God, whenever anybody who looks at this cat loves this cat because of these big eyes. And so he designed E.T.'s eyes from that cat, and it did the job. The estimate on this is $600,000 to $900,000. There has been one other E.T. model that has sold. It was animatronic, where the skin, if you will allow us to call it that, was no longer present. That sold for $2.5 million. So this is the first E.T. to come to market that looks like E.T., where you could look right at it and recognize it.
We have to pause for a few reminders. The biggest business stories from around the country and markets closing data are up next. Keep it here on Business Brief, only on the Bilyonaryo News Channel. Welcome back to Business Brief. Social media giant TikTok pursues more engagement with the Philippine small business community through a digital training program. Our correspondent Sujin Kim joins us on the line for details. Sujin, go ahead.
Yes, Raine, in the renewed push to digitalize the backbone of the Philippine economy, more than 350 micro, small, and medium enterprises will be trained through a public-private initiative between the Department of Trade and Industry and TikTok Shop, aimed at digitizing and scaling local businesses, from sari-sari stores turning into convenience store brands to weavers in Ilocos and bakers in Bicol finding global audiences. The partnership demonstrates that digital transformation is possible if MSMEs are given the right tools and training. The program sets an ambitious 100% growth target in engagement. Trade Secretary Cristina Roque underscores the need to strengthen the country's digital and e-commerce capabilities, noting that 99.5% of all Philippine businesses are MSMEs, employing 60% of the national workforce. The training programs are expected to roll out in Metro Manila, Pampanga, Cebu, and Davao. Trainings include navigating the TikTok Shop Seller Center, understanding tools, analytics, and content strategies, as well as training on compliance with Philippine e-commerce regulations, such as violations and seller protection guidelines. Workshops will also be structured to have mentorship on live selling and content creation. TikTok underscored that no startup capital is required to open a TikTok shop. Simply a smartphone, a product, and participation in the training. And those are latest updates from Makati City. Back to you, Ray.
Thank you so much for that report, Sujin Kim. Still on trade, in February, the Philippines' trade deficit contracted by 11.4% year-on-year. This marks a reversal from January's 17.8% annual increase in the trade deficit. The Philippine Statistics Authority reported Friday the country's trade deficit was cut to $3.16 billion as exports rose and imports declined. Total external trade saw an increase of 0.4% from the same period in 2024. Exports climbed 3.9%, while imports fell 1.8% to $9.41 billion. Bank of Commerce, a unit of San Miguel Corporation, reported its highest ever annual profit in 2024. This marks the highest profit level since becoming an affiliate of San Miguel Corporation as well under Bilyonaryo Ramon Ang. The bank's net income soared 8% year-on-year to 2.5 billion pesos, driven by strong loan growth, higher interest income, and cost efficiencies. Total assets expanded to 250 billion pesos, while net interest income climbed 30% amid rising loan demand. Bancom also reported a robust 15% return on equity, more than double the bank's prospectus, outpacing industry averages and solidifying its position among mid-sized banks. The Anti-Red Tape Authority had set a deadline to digitize 200 LGUs by Q1 in 2028. The government's digitalization drive to streamline business registration and permitting is now behind its 2021 deadline, with over 100 local government units still stuck in manual processing. ARTA Director General Ernesto Perez admitted they've only reached the halfway mark. This comes as ARTA doubles down on minerals, mining, infrastructure, energy, and semiconductors as top priority sectors for streamlining business processes, cutting red tape, and attracting foreign investments. Perez emphasized that these industries are critical to economic growth, yet remain buried under bureaucratic delays.
We will be able, by that guidebook, we should be able to improve our ranking from the initial business ready survey by World Bank, hopefully, in terms of the infrastructure. We belong to the top 40%. We are actually ranked 16, number 16 out of the 100 economies tested.
The national government is set to borrow over 735 billion pesos from the domestic market in the second quarter, a move closely watched by investors, banks, and corporates looking to gauge liquidity conditions and interest rate trends. The Bureau of Treasury says it plans to raise 325 billion pesos in treasury bills and 410 billion in treasury bonds. The borrowing program is 15% higher than the first quarter's 629 billion peso target and up 3% from the 712 billion pesos actually raised in that period. In April alone, the government plans to borrow 245 billion pesos, split between 125 billion in T-bills and 120 billion in T-bonds. This signals sustained demand for domestic capital, with implications for banks' lending capacity, corporate fundraising plans, and overall market yields. Country's financial system remains stable, a crucial signal for Philippine businesses and investors looking for confidence amid global volatility. In its latest financial stability report, the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas says the system is resilient but warns that moderate risks need to be closely watched. Among the key concerns, escalating geopolitical tensions, changing monetary policies in major economies, and potential market reactions to the U.S. presidential elections. The central bank says these global developments could affect capital flows, credit conditions, and business sentiment, with implications for funding costs, investments, and overall economic stability in the Philippines. U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, now in the Philippines for an official visit. He had a courtesy call this morning with President Bongbong Marcos. Hegseth is the first Trump cabinet official to visit the country.
I had a chance to speak just a few minutes ago to our president, President Trump, who sends his regards to you as well. Thinks very fondly of this great country, is very committed to the alliance that we have, to the friendship that we have, the cooperation that we have. And he and I both want to express the ironclad commitment we have to the Mutual Defense Treaty and to the partnership, economically, militarily, which our staffs have worked on diligently for weeks and weeks and months. There is a very real reason why our first trip and our first visit is here to visit you in your great country.
Earlier today, Hegseth joined Filipino and American troops for a physical training. The U.S. Department of Defense has said Hegseth's trip is aimed at advancing America's security objectives with the Philippines. In other news, supporters of former President Rodrigo Duterte are gathering today to celebrate his 80th birthday. In The Hague, the Netherlands, hundreds of people from various countries are expected to hold a picnic near his detention facility. Our colleague and At the Forefront anchor, attorney Karen Jimeno, is there, and she filed this report.
I'm currently here at The Hague in the Netherlands And right behind me is the ICC detention facility where former President Rodrigo Duterte is currently being detained. A few steps away from here is you see the area where Filipinos gather to show their support for former President Duterte. So it is within this metal barricade that people gather. This metal barricade was only added recently by the ICC, and I suppose it's to contain where people can congregate. Because as you can see, the detention facility is right in the middle of a neighborhood. These are private residences. So you can just imagine the disturbance it can cause if there are large crowds and people make a lot of noise. This is the Pomp Station Weg where Filipinos are expected to gather today for a picnic to celebrate the 80th birthday of former President Rodrigo Duterte. And as you can see, it's not a big space. So the challenge is to fit a lot of people here for a picnic with food. Because what I heard is that there would be around 500 to 700 people that are expected today. And a lot of people are going to be bringing food. Kanya-kanya daw silang nag-volunteer na magdala ng food. So this is really an organic gathering that was organized by people. And I met so many people that came from different parts of the world. Merong mga galing ng US, galing sa Malta, Italy, United Kingdom, and meron din mga galing sa Philippines. And ano po ang message nyo sa birthday ni Tatay Digong?
So for me, good health lang po and take it easy po, Tatay, and laban lang po tayo, mga Pilipino.
Kayo po, meron ba kayong message para kay Tatay Digong?
Sa akin, makauwi siya as soon as possible. Yan lang po.
Kayo po, ma'am?
Para sa akin, I've always been praying na sana maging madali para sa kanya ang lahat ng nangyayari. Same with his family and of course to all the Filipinos, and sana din makauwi na siya the soonest.
Meanwhile, Vice President Sara Duterte and her father partner, Hanilet Avancenia, visited the detention facility on the eve of his birthday. The VP says she did not meet the former president and was merely there to pick up his stuff. Several items were then seen being retrieved from the premises.
Hindi ko po nakausap si Pangulong Duterte ngayong araw na ito. Nandito lang po kami para kunin yung mga gamit na pinapakuha. Na hiningi namin na kunin kasi hindi na siya mapasok doon sa loob ng kwarto ni Pangulong Duterte. Kaya binalik nila sa amin yung mga gamit para mag-inventaryo at itago para kay Pangulong Duterte.
Okay naman siya?
Hindi po kami nagkita ngayon, araw na ito. Opo. Nandito lang kami para kunin yung gamit po ni Pangulo.
Nagkukuha sila ngayon.
Shortly after the VP left, Avancenia arrived at the facility, but she left almost right away and was emotional. On to the markets now. Philippine shares swung back to positive territory, bucking the regional trend. The main index was the second best performer in the region, second only to Australia. PSEI finishing the day higher by over 0.1% to 61.47. Week on week, the PSEI is lower by 1.9%. For the end of the week and month, value turnover was a slim 3.4 billion pesos. Still, advancers outdid decliners 110 to 75. Property and services sectors pushed up the market at least 0.75%, with Ayala Firms Globe and Ayala Land rallying more than 2.25% each. Meanwhile, at the foreign exchange market, the peso is currently trading at 57 pesos and 37.5 centavos to the US dollar, flat from Thursday's close of 57.37. Alex Ayala's dream run in the Miami Open comes to an end. The 19-year-old Filipino tennis ace bowed to world number 4 and billionaire heiress Jessica Pegula of the United States. Ayala yielded to Pegula in a 3-set epic 7-6, 5-7, 6-3. Nonetheless, the Pinay wildcard had a historic run in the tournament where she took down 3 Grand Slam champions, including world number 2, Iga Świątek. Her stunning performance has pushed her ranking to number 75 from 140 at the start of the competition. On Bilyonaryo News Channel's newsfeed at noon, veteran sports commentator Anthony Suntay says Ayala's success marks new ground for Philippine tennis.
She's already in the top 100. So she's now qualified for the next 3 Grand Slams for the year. So we're going to have this coming May, darating yung French Open. We're also going to have Wimbledon. And then after that, the US Open. Her life has already changed because they will have to rework her entire schedule for the year because now she has to incorporate all these other tournaments that she's now qualified for. She does not have to go through qualifying anymore. So that, in a sense, is already a major victory because no Filipino has actually, number one, been able to, first of all, is play in the Grand Slams. She actually is a 3-time Grand Slam winner in the junior division. No Filipina has ever been able to do that as well. So this is really new ground for Philippine tennis. And I think because of her success, a lot of youngsters will now start to follow the sport and we might just have future Alex Ayalas in the years to come.
And that's a wrap for today's Business Brief. I'm Raine Musñgi. Join us again on Monday as we bring you the stories that help you plan your next big, bold moves in business, only here on the Bilyonaryo News Channel. Always on top.